Hello, I'm Rob Watson, and this is a Leicester Stories pitch for the Lankelly Chase News and Media Funding Call. The project is based around the idea of community reporters and community reporting, are based on a project that we call Leicester Stories. And what I want to do in this brief presentation is just guide you through some of the issues that are important to us here in Leicester. So Leicester has been in the longest lockdown period of, I think it's anywhere in Europe at the moment, and it's thrown up a lot of very deep-rooted issues around poverty, deprivation, social levels of education, the kind of employment that people have. Leicester is one of the most diverse communities in the country, places in the country. My neighbourhood, High Street, just down the road from where I live, is Narborough Road, and about 3 years ago the London School of Economics reported that it is one of the most diverse neighbourhoods in the city. So this presents a set of issues and problems about how we communicate with the very many disparate, separate groups of people who live in the communities, and ethnic groups, faith groups, communities of identity within Leicester, who have been affected by the pandemic in ways which are kind of linked with those levels of concentrations of poor levels of social resources. So we want the Leicester Stories project to be something which builds on things that we've done in the past. And one of up to about 2012, there was a project in Leicester. It was quite a well-known project called Citizens Eye, which was a citizens media, community media type approach to news, and that learning we want to kind of take forward again. And the idea is that we're going to foster a network of community reporters and interactions between people to tell their own stories. But there's a couple of things that needs. We need access to some platforms. We need to support people to tell their own stories in their own way. And we need to build trust so that those interactions between people are meaningful. And it's about supporting independent conversations. This is slightly different than a traditional news and journalism model, because it's more associated with a community development model. Because you've got to get down into the grassroots and help support and build capacity and capability. So one of the things that's been discovered, surprisingly, through the pandemic has been the low level of English language skills from many people so they ignore things that are put through their letterbox, or they ignore letters, or they don't listen to mainstream media channels. They never tune into the BBC. So we've got to build that capacity and capability up in some way, and we've got to do that in a way which is responsive to the interests and the concerns of those communities. And we're going to try and do this because we're part of a network of other civic sector social organisations who are committed to building back better and seeing some, root and branch change in the city. And our starting point is really to think about how we amplify voices and how we ensure that those who are most in need and most affected by the pandemic have a credible voice, a respected voice. They achieve parity of expression through the ability to talk about things that affect them. So it's using a model of community media that operates across social groups and communities. And it's about fostering trust so that people feel and understand that having that input in an accountable kind of way, a respectful kind of way, is part of your civic duty and part of the way in which you'll bring about change. And it has to be relevant to the interests of each of those different communities. So during the lockdown, the pandemic, children have particularly been, ignored by and large from their having a say. But we have Takeover Radio in Leicester, which is a children's radio station run for children by children. Can we create and support building content there? So our objective is to look at ways that we can actively invest in building and supporting inclusivity. what's the kind of cultural capital and the social capital and the economic capital that we need to think about in order to overcome some of the structural inequalities? How do we foster contributions from those people who are otherwise easily ignored and passed over? And to do this, I think the best way to describe it is we're not thinking in terms of audiences. That's the traditional way of thinking about media. We're thinking in terms of people and communities. But to do this, you've got to focus on building up the familiarity, the trust, the competence of people to exercise and demonstrate their media and civic literacies. You've got to put the building blocks in place. So this kind of focuses on a way of thinking about community media and community reporting as something which is social gain focused, and that's written into the law when you license community radio stations, and we're going to partner with the community radio stations in the city. And it's the idea that we are committed to bringing about some kind of sustainable change. And the framework that we've got, we're working with De Montfort University, is to put this into an integrated sustainable development framework, kind of in the background, and to use the UNESCO communication for development techniques. So this kind of stuff is well established elsewhere. We're just going to try and apply it here in Leicester and get some buy-in from our public institutions that this is a legitimate and trusted form and an accessible form of communication. But we've got to be realistic about what we're trying to do. So you've got to build trust, and that takes time. You've got to foster mutual support and collaboration. That's built on trust. That takes time. You've got to facilitate the exchange of knowledge, and that's community knowledge, grassroots tacit knowledge. You've got to encourage those who are easily ignored to take part, and that their voices and their experiences matter. So it's really developed, kind of grounding this in the community development model and practices. We always say about community media, it's 10% media and 90% community development. So it's about collaborative learning, and we're looking at the way that we can focus our communications around that sense of kind of collaboration. There's a lot of experience in the city from lots of different partner organisations, and this is being focused around, particularly around De Montfort University's Build Back Better network. And we want to strengthen those partnerships by being helping to provide and facilitate a kind of media glue, if you like, that kind of brings some of these things together and gets issues that wouldn't otherwise be discussed or expanded upon or gone into detail onto our radio services and through our social media platforms. And in this way, we kind of build shared knowledge and experience and insight. So we treat people as assets. So it's that ABCD asset-based community development approach. And as I said earlier, Citizens Eye was a trailblazer of this over 10 years ago, and we're kind of rekindling what was done on that project to see if we can apply it again, because things have moved on and things have changed, and I think there's a willingness for public service, public sector organisations to look at these things in a different light. So what we're hoping to do is invest in a cooperative platform through which we can collaborate and engage different people to start to facilitate the development of news, information, editorial content that can be shared within the different community media groups, platforms, and others as well. So it's dedicated to an idea of, if you like, in its broadest sense, community-focused communication. And that's defined by what its social gain purpose is. What difference does it make in a community? Our partners with this, DMU is going to share infrastructure and expertise, got a good relationship with De Montfort. Decentered Media, which is Rob Watson, is going to provide kind of network and planning and evaluation, advice and support. Then we've got the community radio stations, and we've got Leicester Community Radio, Takeover Radio, Radio Sierra, Cohenor Radio. They're going to provide access to broadcast platforms and volunteers, very much part of the process driving this. And then our partner organisations in the social sector are Reaching People, Leicestershire Cares, Health Watch Leicester, the Race Equality Centre, and others that we'll build and network with to provide access to share these civic social stories about what it means to people to change and to grow and to nurture development in the city. So to do this, we're going to use a range of multimedia tools through podcasts, blogs. I've got a lot of experience now of producing podcasts and video channels, that kind of thing, and sharing easily accessible content and material that helps and supports people to learn and to share ideas. We also want to do this between the kind of network of civic society practitioners, advocates, planners. So there'll be an element of this where we're talking not just to the thing to avoid is only talking to the planning community. We really need to show that this is a practice-based approach rather, it's a bottom-up approach rather than a top-down approach. So we're going to share that also internationally, because we can do that through DMU's role as a United Nations Sustainable Development Goal champion. So this has got potential for links elsewhere as well. Costs are going to be around about 15,000 for a development support person to work over 12 months. There's kind of probably costs are going to be involved in engaging other organisations and facilitating them, like the stations. They need a bit of support to make sure that they can contribute and that they can put the time aside to contribute to the project. There's also some cost in developing capacity for infrastructure. We need a platform to base this on. We need to get people familiar in using those platforms. And we also need to ensure that we can facilitate, if you want to bring about change, if you really want to ensure that people are able to contribute and take part in something which brings about change, we're going to have to make sure that we support them so that, childcare facilities, transport, time off work, that kind of thing is not too much of a problem for them, that they get some kind of support so that they can engage with the project. Right, Whistle Stop Tour. These are my contact details. I'm providing a PDF document that goes with this, with all of these written down, so you can copy and paste things from there. And I suppose our partner organisations, as I mentioned earlier, they're actively, the links for all of our partner organisations will be in this document as well. And I suppose kind of what it boils down to is that it's about building something better. And we too often don't see our media as part of this. We don't see this as part of, our media is never seen as part of the tools and the process for facilitating community change. And we need to start thinking of it like that. So we need to create a safe and accountable space for people to come together and share their stories and experiences. We need to invest in a sense of community development and engagement practices first and above all else, and they take a bit longer and they're a bit harder to do, but that's where the investment comes in. And it needs to be relevant and trusted as a facilitator of our local conversations, determined locally, designed locally, listened to locally, and shared internationally. But primarily, it's about people here in Leicester being able to talk about their own experiences and the challenges of their own lives and the joys of their own lives as we build back from the kind of the stress and the panic of the pandemic. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully I've explained things well enough. Any questions, please do get in contact with me. I'll be very happy to answer anything and to point in the direction of anything that you might need further on.